Now, Mark Zuckerberg announced this week that Facebook will no longer use third-party fact checkers to moderate content on its site. Facebook will now adopt the approach of Elon Musk with X, using community notes in which other users attach context to posts. Zuckerberg said the election indicates a cultural tipping point towards prioritizing speech. So, Jenny, is this idea of community notes, does it work? Is it effective in moderating content?
So we've had a couple of years now to look at community notes on X to understand what sort of impact it has on the production and the spread of false and misleading information on X. And Tim Graham, who's at Queensland University of Technology, has been systematically looking at this. The research he's reported so far suggests that notes are not effective for a couple reasons. One is that this idea of community notes means that when people see posts, they then comment on whether or not the post is factually correct or not and what the problem is. And others then weigh in and functionally vote on whether or not they agree a note should be appended. That's what Zuckerberg refers to as a diverse perspective, diverse perspectives that would then give rise to these community notes. The problem is that that takes time. And so while the community is deliberating, to the extent that there is deliberation, the message is out there. The false and misleading information is out there and it is spreading. And so when the community finally agrees and a note is appended, Tim's research also suggests that it's not actually engaged with, not nearly as much as the original message itself. And we know that corrections are very hard. Once a false piece of information is out there, it's hard to get it corrected in the minds of the public. We tend to hold on to that old information, and the new information we don't update. And then I think just the last piece is that consensus is really tricky. When you're dealing with factual information where you can point to right and wrong, or correct or incorrect, that's easier. But when you're dealing with moral issues, then it's much, much harder to get any kind of agreement.
So Ben, the one of the criticisms of the fact checkers and this sort of content moderation is that it's biased against conservative speech, and that's one of the reasons he makes it.
I mean, that's a fact, not an argument. It has been. If you look at Google, and for example, as a news feed, you still have to be critical and be a critical thinker and diversify what I guess journalists. Outlets that you look at, because they do have slants on the facts. So you have to, you have to diversify what you're going to look at. If you turn on Fox and look at Fox, and then you turn on CNN, those are two different views of the world. It's almost like two different worlds, but you have to do that. You've got to critically look at everything, or you're just going to be listening to other people that think just like you.
But when you make a statement that ivermectin will cure COVID, that is factually incorrect, and there's no ideological bias on that.
Well, another issue though, to your point, is not only does it take time, it also is access. So the difference between X and Facebook is usually the friends. It's going to the friends versus to a public forum where there's more people to put the note-taking on there, community notes.
Go ahead.
Oh, the opposite side of the, the other way to do this is in-time fact-checking, which is what they were sort of forced to do. And I think I'm right, but maybe you can correct me, Jennifer, that actually is effective. So the research shows that adding a note to a post when it's up, right, initially, does actually help people distinguish between truth and fiction, and that the experiments have showed that people believe it less and share those posts less. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is less engagement. But again, time matters on that. It has to be there immediately. The other thing that Facebook and X had been doing is they've been deprecating or removing factually incorrect posts so that they weren't spreading in the first place.
Ty?
Yeah, I think for Mark Zuckerberg, he's a weather vane. The wind comes from the left, he points to the left. The wind comes from the right, he points from the right. So his business model is to make sure that he's not upsetting whoever's in power. Yeah. And that's his business model. He needs to do that. So I sort of understand what he's doing here. Social media is still in its infancy, and it's all pretty bad anyway. So, but I don't think this is the end of the issue. I think this is just an interim stage, and it's gonna come back again, because we don't know what the crisis is gonna come, where there's gonna be false information and deaths lead to that, then they're gonna have to come back again. So I think we're just in a in the early
But
stages.
I mean, Ty, I would just add, though, I totally agree with you that he's a weather vane, but I think fundamentally these tech bros really do believe that they know best, and they would prefer the government doesn't interfere in anything they do, and they think their platforms are doing good in the world, and don't tell them any differently. So I think there's a big ego, and there's economic interest too here.
So one thing I'm wondering about, you mentioned deaths could happen from something in the future. We don't know what it's going to be, and this is a bigger question probably than we can handle on this. I mean, we have a bedrock First Amendment right? And the answer to speech is more speech. And how do you balance that in a world in which something can go viral and the algorithm can push something so quickly?
We believe in free speech over safety right now. Right, as we're speaking at this moment, free speech is more important than safety. That doesn't mean it'll always be that way, but at this moment, it feels that way.
But free speech is something that is how do I put this? This is what government, right? We have said that we do not want government to be dictating our speech, but private companies routinely govern our speech. And these platforms are private companies. And there is a challenge here. Zuckerberg was not fully transparent in his press release by talking about fact checking, when in fact, one of the other major changes that are happening is the reduction or a massive change in their policies around hate speech.
So these private companies, though, today are the public sphere. I mean, Twitter and, X and Facebook, and that's the public sphere.
But it raises questions about what is the obligation of these companies around the sorts of conversations that are happening. Free speech to some is hate speech to others. It can be directly harmful to minoritized populations when you call them violent, murderous, etc.
Correct, is protected speech. We need to go to the A's and F's.
Hate speech is protected speech in the context of government.
Yes.